Imagine this. You are standing at the edge of a vast, dark forest. The trees loom tall and ancient, their twisted branches forming a canopy so thick that no light penetrates. You feel a pull, an inexplicable urge to step inside, but something holds you back. It's not fear of the unknown. It's the certainty that something in there knows you. Something hidden, something primal, something you've spent your entire life trying to ignore. This is the shadow, not the literal absence of light, but the psychological darkness within us all. It's the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The anger, the envy, the greed, the desires we've buried so deep we've convinced ourselves they don't exist. But here's the unsettling truth. The shadow doesn't disappear just because we ignore it. It grows, it festers, it waits. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist who first named this concept, called it the dark side of human nature. But what does that really mean? Is the shadow something to be feared or something to be understood? Is it a curse or a key? Consider this paradox. The very parts of ourselves we try to hide are often the ones that hold the most power. The anger you suppress might be the source of your strength. The envy you deny might be the spark of your ambition. The greed you condemn might be the seed of your survival instinct. But when we reject these aspects of ourselves, they don't vanish. They take on a life of their own. They become the monsters in our dreams, the voices in our heads, the saboteurs of our success. So the question becomes, what happens when we confront the shadow? What happens when we stop running from the darkness and instead turn to face it? Is it possible to integrate these hidden parts of ourselves, not as enemies, but as allies? Or are we doomed to be forever divided, forever at war with ourselves? This is not just a philosophical musing, it's a matter of survival. Because the longer we ignore the shadow, the more it controls us. It's the reason we sabotage our own happiness. It's the reason we attract the same toxic relationships, the same destructive patterns, the same cycles of pain. It's the reason we feel incomplete, even when everything in our lives seems perfect. But here's the twist. The shadow is not just a personal problem. It's a collective one. Every society, every culture, every civilization has its own shadow. The atrocities it denies, the injustices it justifies, the truths it buries. And just like the individual shadow, the collective shadow doesn't disappear. When ignored, it grows, it festers, it waits. So the question is not just how to confront your own shadow, but how to confront the shadow of the world around you. How do you navigate a reality where darkness is not the exception, but the rule? How do you find light in a world that seems determined to extinguish it? The answers lie not in the light, but in the darkness. Not in denial, but in integration. Not in fear, but in understanding. And that is where the journey begins. Not with a step forward, but with a deep, unflinching look inward. The shadow is not an accident of human nature, it is an inevitability. To understand why, we must delve into the very fabric of the human psyche. Carl Jung believed that the shadow is born from the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming a fully realized self. As we grow, we are taught to conform to societal norms, to suppress certain traits and amplify others. The qualities deemed unacceptable, anger, selfishness, lust, aggression, are pushed into the unconscious, where they form the shadow. But the shadow is not just a collection of repressed traits. It is a living, breathing force. Jung described it as the thing a person has no wish to be. It is the embodiment of everything we fear, everything we reject, everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves. And yet, paradoxically, it is also the source of our greatest potential. This duality is at the heart of the shadow's power. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who profoundly influenced Jung, understood this well. He wrote, "One must still, have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos Nietzsche speaks of is the shadow, the raw, untamed energy that, when harnessed, can lead to profound transformation. But when ignored, it becomes a destructive force, tearing apart the very fabric of our lives. Arthur Schopenhauer, another thinker who explored the darker aspects of human nature, saw the shadow as a manifestation of the will, the primal, irrational force that drives all human behavior. He believed that the will is inherently selfish, driven by an insatiable hunger for survival and pleasure. The shadow, in this sense, is the will's darker impulses, the parts of ourselves we try to deny but cannot escape. And then there is Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, who saw the shadow as a test of our humanity. In the face of unimaginable suffering, Frankl discovered that even in the darkest moments, we have the freedom to choose our response. The shadow, he argued, is not just a personal challenge, it is a moral one. It forces us to confront the question, who are we really when stripped of our masks and pretenses? The shadow is not just a psychological construct, it is a philosophical and existential one. It challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truth that we are not purely good or purely evil, but a complex blend of both. It forces us to reckon with the fact that the darkness we see in the world is a reflection of the darkness within ourselves. But here's the problem. Modern society is built on the illusion of perfection. We are taught to present a curated version of ourselves, to hide our flaws and amplify our virtues. Social media, with its endless streams of filtered images and carefully crafted narratives, has only exacerbated this tendency. The result is a culture of denial, where the shadow is not just ignored, it is actively suppressed. And yet, the shadow cannot be suppressed forever. It leaks out in subtle ways, in the passive-aggressive comment, the irrational outburst, the self-destructive behavior. It manifests in our relationships, our work, our health. It is the reason we feel disconnected, unfulfilled, incomplete. The shadow is not just a personal problem, it is a societal one. Every culture has its own shadow. The injustices it perpetuates, the truths it buries, the atrocities it denies. And just like the individual shadow, the collective shadow grows when ignored. It festers, it waits. So the question is not just how to confront your own shadow, but how to confront the shadow of the world around you. How do you navigate a reality where darkness is not the exception, but the rule? How do you find light in a world that seems determined to extinguish it? The answers lie not in the light, but in the darkness. Not in denial, but in integration. Not in fear, but in understanding. And that is where the journey begins. Not with a step forward, but with a deep, unflinching look inward. The shadow is not content to remain hidden. It seeps into every corner of our lives, shaping our thoughts, our behaviors, and our relationships in ways we rarely recognize. It is the silent architect of our self-sabotage, the invisible hand guiding our worst decisions. And yet, because it operates in the unconscious, we often fail to see its influence. Consider this. How many times have you found yourself repeating the same mistakes, falling into the same toxic patterns, despite your best intentions? How many times have you wondered why you can't seem to break free from the cycles of pain and disappointment? The answer lies in the shadow. It is the part of you that clings to familiarity, even when that familiarity is destructive. It is the part of you that fears change, even when change is necessary. Cognitive biases play a significant role in this process. The negativity bias, for example, causes us to give more weight to negative experiences than positive ones. A single traumatic event can overshadow years of happiness simply because our brains are wired to prioritize survival over satisfaction. This is why the past often feels heavier than the present, why old wounds seem to hurt more than new ones. But the shadow's influence goes even deeper. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It thrives on predictability, even when that predictability is harmful. This is why we repeat the same mistakes, why we fall into the same toxic relationships, why we keep returning to the same self-destructive habits. The brain would rather stick with what it knows than venture into the unknown, even if the unknown holds the promise of something better. And then there's the cultural conditioning. From a young age, we are taught to define ourselves by our past. Our achievements, our failures, our traumas, they become part of our identity, something we carry with us like a badge of honor or a mark of shame. We are told that our past determines our future, that we are the sum of our experiences. But what if this is a lie? What if the past is not a prophecy, but a story, one that we have the power to rewrite? The unseen consequences of living in the shadow's grip are profound. It robs us of our agency, our creativity, our potential. It keeps us trapped in a cycle of fear and regret, unable to fully embrace the present or imagine a different future. It convinces us that we are powerless, that change is impossible, that we are doomed to repeat the same mistakes forever. But here's the truth. The shadow only has as much power over you as you give it. It is not a life sentence, it is a story. And like all stories, it can be rewritten, reinterpreted, and ultimately released. The question is not whether you can break free from the shadow, but whether you are willing to confront the unseen forces that keep you tethered to it. Are you ready to see the strings? Are you ready to cut them? Breaking free from the shadow is not a passive act. It is a rebellion. It requires courage, defiance, and a willingness to confront the very forces that have shaped you. This is not about forgetting the past or pretending it never happened. It's about reclaiming your power, rewriting your story, and choosing to live on your own terms. The first step in this rebellion is awareness. You must become a detective of your own mind, uncovering the hidden beliefs and patterns that keep you tethered to the shadow. This is where shadow work, as Carl Jung called it, becomes essential. Shadow work is the process of bringing the unconscious into the light, of facing the parts of yourself you've been afraid to acknowledge. It's uncomfortable, even painful, but it's also liberating. Because the moment you see the strings, you can begin to cut them. Start by asking yourself, what stories am I telling myself about who I am? Are they stories of strength and resilience, or of failure and inadequacy? Are they stories you've chosen, or ones that have been imposed on you? Write them down, examine them, challenge them. Ask yourself, is this really true? Or is it just a story I've been telling myself for so long that I've started to believe it? The next step is acceptance. This is not about condoning or excusing the past, but about acknowledging it without judgment. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote extensively about the power of acceptance. He believed that even in the most dire circumstances, we have the freedom to choose our attitude, to find meaning in our suffering. This is not easy, but it is necessary, because until you accept the shadow, you will remain at war with it. And a war with the shadow is a war with yourself. Once you've accepted the shadow, the real work begins. Reinterpretation. This is where you take control of the narrative. Instead of seeing your past as a series of mistakes and misfortunes, try to see it as a series of lessons and opportunities. What did you learn from those experiences? How did they shape you into the person you are today? How can you use them to create a better future? This is not about sugarcoating or denying the pain, but about finding meaning in it. Finally, there is action. Breaking free from the shadow is not a one-time event, it's a daily practice. It requires you to make conscious choices, to take risks, to step into the unknown. It means saying no to the patterns and habits that keep you stuck, and yes to the possibilities that scare you. It means embracing uncertainty, trusting yourself, and believing in your ability to create something new. This rebellion is not easy, but it is worth it. Because on the other side of it is freedom, not just from the shadow, but from the limitations you've placed on yourself. It's the freedom to live authentically, to love deeply, to dream boldly. It's the freedom to be who you truly are. But this is not the end of the journey. It's only the beginning, because the ultimate truth about breaking free from the shadow is even more profound and more empowering than you might imagine. Here is the ultimate truth, the revelation that changes everything. The shadow is not your enemy. It sounds paradoxical, even absurd. How can the shadow, the source of so much pain, so much fear, so much self-sabotage, not be your enemy? But think about it. The shadow is not some external force, some malevolent entity out to destroy you. It is a part of you. It is the part of you that has been ignored, rejected, and denied. And like any part of you that has been neglected, it has grown restless, rebellious, and destructive. Carl Jung understood this better than anyone. He believed that the shadow is not just a source of darkness, but also a source of immense potential. It contains the raw, untamed energy that, when harnessed, can lead to profound transformation. The anger you suppress might be the source of your strength. The envy you deny might be the spark of your ambition. The greed you condemn might be the seed of your survival instinct. The shadow is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. This is the radical shift in perspective that changes everything. The shadow is not a curse. It is a key. It is the key to unlocking your true potential, to becoming the person you were meant to be. But to unlock that potential, you must first confront the shadow. You must face it, accept it, and integrate it. This is not easy. It requires courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. It requires you to let go of the stories you've been telling yourself, the masks you've been wearing, the identities you've been clinging to. It requires you to step into the darkness, not with fear, but with curiosity. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The shadow begins to lose its power. The anger becomes strength. The envy becomes ambition. The greed becomes survival. The darkness becomes light. This is the ultimate truth. The shadow is not something to be conquered, but something to be embraced. It is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. It is not something to be rejected, but something to be integrated. And when you integrate the shadow, you become whole. You become the person you were always meant to be. You become free. So the question is not how to break free from the shadow, but how to embrace it, how to see it not as an enemy, but as an ally, how to use it not as a source of pain, but as a source of power. This is the journey of a lifetime. It is not easy, but it is worth it, because on the other side of it is freedom, not just from the shadow, but from the limitations you've placed on yourself. It's the freedom to live authentically, to love deeply, to dream boldly. It's the freedom to be who you truly are, and that is the ultimate truth.